I'm JJ Heller, and this is Instrumental, a show about the big and small moments that shape our lives. In every episode, my guest and I start near the end of their story and work our way back to the beginning. I hope our conversation reminds you that every second matters, because none of us knows which moment will be the one that changes everything.
Big love happens in the small moments.
Hey everybody, it's JJ.
And it's her husband, Dave.
This week on Instrumental, our guest is Scott Erickson.
Scott is an incredibly gifted visual artist, and he's also a public speaker, and you will hear a little bit more about that later.
Yep, we met Scott about 14 years ago in Arizona when we were part of the same church service.
He did this thing that I actually hadn't seen done well before, where the pastor was speaking and he was creating a painting during the sermon.
Well, and Scott was creating the painting.
Scott was, yeah. The sermon was being given by a guy, and Scott was painting.
And it was incredible.
Whatever you picture in your mind of what this looks like, it's better. He's really good.
He's super duper really good. Also, a few months ago at the start of the pandemic, I listened to Scott giving a sermon online, and it inspired me to write my song called You Already Know.
So if you've been driving around in your car and you heard that song on the radio, or if it came up on your Spotify playlist, you have Scott to thank.
That's right.
And so do we.
Yes, very much so. All right, here's a disclaimer about this week's episode. Scott's a little bit saltier than a lot of the guests we have on this podcast, and because radical honesty plays a significant role in Scott's narrative, we've chosen to leave in some strong language.
If you have little kids in the car listening in, this is probably not the episode for them to hear.
And if an occasional swear word offends you,
this is probably not the episode for you to hear either.
Consider yourself warned. But for those of you who are still listening, buckle up because Scott has been on quite a journey.
All right, JJ, take it away.
Act 3, pick up the phone. A few years ago, Scott found himself in a season of transition where he had to find a new way to use his giftings. Among other things, this came in the form of developing one-man plays to communicate his spiritual journey.
Some friends of a church nearby my house gave me a basement space, and I built out a little windowless studio in the basement, and they'd keep the trash down there one day a week, and it'd smell like garbage.
Oh,
and I just remember, it was like 3 years ago, and my wife is she's a decently famous food blogger called The Modern Proper. I saw her grow her Instagram to 60,000 followers in a year organically. And so I was like, I don't know what to do with this platform. I'm not involved with anything anymore. I'm literally in this basement.
With the trash.
With the trash. I remember being down there and being like, nobody cares what you're doing, which isn't necessarily, my mom cares, but like nobody's watching you. You know, I wasn't involved in anything. I was just like me, all by myself. And I was like, what do you want to do, Scott? What do you want to talk about? And I just was like, I hate how we talk about religion in this culture. I hate how we talk about God in American Christianity. It like doesn't make sense to me anymore.
Can you say a little bit more about that?
There's definitely a genre of like preachers. There's a way that you're supposed to talk about God that just didn't allow for mystery or absurdity or the inner Eeyore and sadness I felt about being alive. Life is a miracle, but I feel sad a lot. You know, and I felt like church always is like spiritual Prozac. Like the goal of it is for you to feel happy afterwards. And I'm definitely for the like reminding of each other promises and coming alongside each other, all that. But I found that poets had a better way of describing God.
Well, there's not a lot of room for lament in the modern church.
There's not a lot of room for lament. And there's kind of like church jokes, but not real jokes. I haven't seen you in the audience, so I don't think you've seen Say Yes. But my show Say Yes it's called A Liturgy of Not Giving Up on Yourself. And in some ways, it's a church service about suicide, because I've never been to one. And I was like, how do you talk about suicide in a spiritual context? And I was like, it has to be funny, because you don't want people to go through it and be like, man, I'm so bored, I want to kill myself, because that would be
Irony.
irony. The first thing I say at Say Yes is, we're all here. What we know about here is that life is a mixture of sacred moments and dick jokes at the same time. Now, you can't go to the comedy club and be too sacred, because they'll say that's not the place for this. And you can't go to the sacred space and be too crass, because that's not the space for that either. And I understand both of those contexts, I really do, and I respect them. I just think when we go to either one, we wish it was a little bit more, because we understand that we're a little bit more. And so in order for us to have the conversation that we need to make space for the little bit more. And that's what we're going to do tonight. Real life is actually these things at the same time. Like, the Pope has diarrhea. Mother Teresa had a monthly period. Like, we are souls wrapped in biological bodies that are doing all of these things. And the biology and the fluids are not the dismissers of our sacredness. They are part of it. It's what gives the spirit and the sacredness a home to live in for a time. I got tired of spaces where like, well, I can't believe you said that. It's like, but we all fought it. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's it. And I don't know quite where that is, because you can't go last year I got to perform at a comedy club. Like, Joe Rogan was next door and he walked in during what I was doing and he's like, what the hell is this? Because it wasn't quite comedy. And I've done this at churches and people are like, oh, we've never had anything like that here, and it's not just like preaching or teaching. It's like, I don't know, it feels honest. And I think that's where I'm more concerned, or I'm like, the sinister path of the spirituality that we're living in is it's creating divided people. It's not helping us become whole. It's making us two different kinds of people.
The sacred and the secular.
Yeah, and I think if there is a way forward, what we need to do is we need to make kindness with these sides of us that seemingly are opposite but actually aren't. And we need to provide places where they can come together. I'm not like trying to be more crass. It's not like I want to tell like, poop jokes at church. It's not what I'm trying to do. Because even when I go to churches, like I understand, I'm like, there's families here. I understand the context. But if I was going to be in charge of something, specifically on a topic like suicide, I was like, forget your formalities. Like, if we're talking to somebody who wants to take their life, like, I don't think we need to worry about dick jokes in the sacred space. Like, we're long past that. How did I even start on this rant?
Okay.
about how I wanted to talk about God, because you're like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
And then I was like, I don't like most of the art that I've seen in churches, so I want to make stuff that I want to make, which nods to a tradition that I'm part of, but is recontextualizing it. And I was like, I know I'm pastoral in some sense, but I don't work at a church right now. But I think at the time I had a few thousand followers on Instagram, and I was like, well, here's a group of people I could care for through art making and stuff like that. And that's where I came up with the gift-giving engine. The engine of earning love through productivity is a strong engine, and it'll get you out of bed. But it eventually leads to self-destruction. What do you replace that strong engine with? Because I don't also want to like not do anything, and I have ambition and I'd like to do things. The engine that I've learned that it can be just as strong is the engine of gift giving, like thinking that I could bring a gift to a person, a scenario, a situation or something. Why you don't want to do Instagram is because you're trying to make what you're eating for lunch feel important, and it's not. I think what's happening to me too is like I'm getting more eyes on me, and then more people want to poke and say things, and there's some really mean people out there. Yeah. And I thought I had some tough skin, but there's some things lately that I've just been like, I don't want to do this anymore. So those are the kind of the things that I had to find I had to recenter on that stuff.
Yeah.
So what is something that you could do to care for these people, even though they're between screens? And when I was like, oh, I could offer them like soul formation or spiritual meditation through image contemplation like I do, I could offer them that same practice. That's a way that I could give them a gift. And I found like when I did that, I was like, oh, it makes me want to work on this. Because if it's just about trying to promote me, then that dries up really fast. Gosh, I haven't said this out loud. I'll say it to you. Because, like, especially in the realms of spirituality, I've been pretty heartbroken lately because I feel like, why even talk about this stuff? Because a lot of times it makes people monsters. Like, I'm having a hard time with, like, the tradition I grew up in because I'm like, this makes people awful people in a lot of ways. It makes people really amazing, too, but I think Richard Rohr says it best when I have this teaching on his, and he starts with the Bible, and he goes, we need to understand that this book has created some of the worst things in the world and some of the best things. And so when we come to this book, it has potential to do both. That really helps me going, yeah, you're going to come across some really sick parts of religion because it has the potential to make people awful.
Yeah.
But do you want to be a part, because you've experienced that, do you want to be a part of helping the freeing and holistic and forgiving and enlightening and transformational work that the Spirit is doing in the world through this as well? And I don't want to, but if I was the head pastor of a church, I would have a DJ on stage with me every sermon. Not to be cool, not to be like hip, but because I think the best way to tell stories is with a musical accompaniment. And we would work it out. One of my favorite shows is Snap Judgment, where they tell stories with the beat, and their live performances are amazing. I would do that. And then I found myself, this is a few years ago, live painting at an African-American pastors conference. And I'm up on stage, so Norwegian up there, but I'm there, and the music gets done, but the band stays on stage, and the preacher comes up, and I was like, interesting. Okay. And then 10, 15 minutes into his sermon, he just is like, and the band's like, bam. And then he goes, ba, ba, bam, bam.
What?
And then he's like, and then everybody's like, and everybody gets out of their seat and they dance around. And I was like, oh, I just grew up in the wrong tradition. This is already a thing. I knew it was the way we should be doing it. And I was just like, I just was around a bunch of stoic Norwegians who lost touch with their emotions. I needed to be in this, you know what I'm saying? I remember being in Kenya at this church service and with dirt floors and stuff, and they open up these English hymnals, and it's kind of like an Eddie Izzard joke where they're just like, hallelujah, just so boring. And then they close the book and somebody's like, and then everybody's like, and I was like, wait, why were you doing that boring dead thing with the book? Obviously, you know how to sing in your own culture. It's already embodied. Just go with that, you know. But you think you're supposed to, these people wrote a book. They made a book of songs, and we should do that one in its boring way. So I think the journey of belonging is going, maybe you don't belong where you found yourself because you're just in the wrong tradition. But you're going to find your crew. You're going to find your tribe. And if you can't, start making it, and then they'll come and find you. You know, that's the thing. With the say yes, with the dick jokes and sacred moments, when I would say it, the whole audience would go, thank you. Like, this is what I've been looking for. I needed somebody to help make the space where we could talk like this.
Yeah.
I've been talking this way my whole life and haven't found a space where we could talk like this.
Well, it's kind of like you're giving people permission to be human.
Yes, exactly. I developed a one-man show called We Are Not Trouble Guests. It's a line from a David Whyte poem, and it's about the gift of your existential crisis. And I performed that 3 years, about 75 times. It wasn't anything that I thought, hey, this is what I'm going to do for the next while in my life. It was more like it came out and I was like, this is what I'm doing, you know? So I did that until I kind of, everywhere I knew somebody, it kind of ended.
Was any kind of visual art involved, or was it exclusively just you speaking?
Oh, no. So the format, which I've carried into my next show, is a microphone, a screen, and a canvas. So there's speaking, singing through the microphone. There's a whole video projection thing. And then I'm making something physically on stage. And the physical thing turns into something else at the end. So it's like creating a stage character that then becomes something unexpected. There's like a magic trick I want to do where I want to like break the rules of what you think you're supposed to do with a painting. At the end, it ends up becoming a character, and I cut a hole in it, and I destroy the canvas. You're not supposed to cut the canvas. That's a big no-no. So I break that rule. I mean, people were like, I've never seen anything like this, which is a nice thing to hear. So I share my like one really mystical experience. I burned out, and then a couple weeks later, praying with this older woman in my church, I had this deeply mystical experience in a prayer session. And I just was always like, well, there's that. And that came with me through my year and a half of depression.
What was your mystical experience?
Oh my gosh. Okay. I was burned out. I didn't know what to do. I really couldn't pray, but some friends of mine who were worship leaders, they had been praying with this older woman in our church, like healing prayer. So I asked her if she would pray with me. So we prayed a few times. So this one time, our third time we got together, she said, we're going to do this thing called theophostic prayer. Theo means God, phostic means light. We're just going to ask God to bring light to this situation. So we met at my studio and we started praying. I wouldn't say anything. She just prayed for me. Started praying, and look, I usually keep my eyes open during prayer, but while we were praying, my eyelids were so heavy. I just was like fighting them. And finally I was like, I'm just going to close my eyes. Close my eyes. And while my eyes were closed, the essence of myself, you know, like where I feel like I'm at, which is usually in my head, just like moved down to the center of my being. It's like it got really close together. It's almost like I could feel the hollowed out torso that it left. I guess my soul or spirit, I don't know, whatever, it just moved to like the center of me. So my eyes are closed and I'm just in this like condensed space. And I start seeing this image with my mind's eye, and it comes like in a fog, but all of a sudden I'm on this like baseball diamond with my 6th grade self and my elementary school teachers and my classmates. So this experience happened to me, and I hadn't thought about this story in years, but this experience happened to me in 6th grade, where at the end of the year, the last thing we had to do before we graduated was we played the teachers in a softball match. There was enough teachers for positions, but there were more students than positions, so it was going to be like pick our team. And we all knew how the teams were going to be picked. It was like the cool kids were going to get picked. And I didn't know what being cool or not cool was. I just knew I wasn't cool. And I had been playing Little League since I was really young. So I just had this overwhelming sense like I should be in this game. Like this is the moment I can give back. I didn't get picked, but I wanted to be in the game so bad that I made myself a base coach, which is like a really important position in a game between adults and children. And so during the game...
Is that sarcasm? I can't tell.
Yeah, that's sarcasm. I never left the field. I just stayed on the field. So I was the base coach for the enemy as well. In one, there was like 2 outs. In one, I was base coaching third base side. A teacher's up to bat, so I'm base coaching for the enemy. The teacher hit a pop fly ball like right to me, and because I'm highly trained in the art of Little League, I just instinctually run for the ball. I don't have a glove or a hat. I'm not even in the game, but I just run for this ball, this giant spinning softball with my small elementary school hands, and I try to catch it, and it bounces off my hands and falls to the ground. And I'm like, oh, I dropped it. And then that's when I heard like all my classmates are like, get off the field. Like, what are you doing? You're not in the game. Like, you're ruining the inning and all that. And I was so humiliated. I came off the field and I stood with the other students, and the game kept going, and I made my way to like the back of the crowd. And then kind of without anybody noticing, I just like walked away, and I walked back to our classroom, and I sat at my desk the rest of the day. I mean, there's like an hour, like 40 minutes left. I don't know. I just sat there until the bell rang. And I remember that moment really like being kind of the first time of going, oh, this is what it feels like when you don't belong. And so in this vision, in this like trance I'm having, I'm there with my 6th grade self, and it's really hard to explain, but we're not different people. We're the same person. We're just different time versions of each other. So he can see out of my eyes, I can see out of his. And it's like right when we drop the ball and everything's kind of in slow motion, but the teachers are there and the students are like, get off the field. It's just kind of in this loop. So I tell Rosemary this whole story, and I was like, this seems weird that we're here. And she's like, well, this is where we're at. So she says, Jesus, would you bring light to this situation? And then a fake Jesus shows up. Visually, it's better because I show a picture of Jesus with a white robe and blue sash, and he's got blonde hair, and he looks like he's cousin of the god Thor. And I'm like, I knew it was a fake Jesus. It was like the Jesus from Sunday school, like the cartoons they would hand out. So he looks at us and he says, Scott, this is something that happened to you as a kid. You're an adult now. You know how to navigate this. You don't need to let it have so much weight in your life.
This is fake Jesus saying
This is fake Jesus said this. And I told that to Rosemary, and she's like, what do you think about that? And I was like, yeah, fake Jesus, that's a good point. But nothing changed. And I was like, but it's not, like, nothing's happening. Like, it's not doing anything. And I thought if you were going to bring light to a situation, it would change things, and nothing's changing, so it's not doing anything. So I tell that to Rosemary, and she goes, well, let's ask again. Jesus, bring light to this situation. And then we're not on the field. We're in my classroom, and I'm sitting at my little desk with me, my 6th grade self, and fake Jesus. And he looks at us, and he says, Scott, this is just kid emotions. It's something you felt as a kid, and you're an adult now. You know how to navigate this. You don't need to let it have so much weight in your life. And I told that to Rosemary, and she's like, what do you think about that? And I was like, yeah, fake Jesus, but same thing. It's not doing anything. Nothing's changing. And so then we're back at the field. Fake Jesus is gone. And I'm kind of like, this is dumb. What are we doing? And she's like, well, let's ask one more time. So she says, Jesus, let's bring light to this situation. And I don't really know how to describe Jesus to you, because I could only see him like out of the corner of my eye the whole time. But this like overwhelming, like this, it's weird to describe because it's a juxtaposition. It's a paradox. It's like, it was like the entire universe wrapped in a man's body. like the presence was incalculably big. And yet I had this sense of like hair and clothes and like a lot of brown, like just like earth tones, like, hair and beard and just kind of brown clothes, brown skin. And he walks over to me and he puts his arm around my shoulder, and then his hand goes into my torso. And then he just begins to like lift up like my skin. And it's like, the feeling was like if you've ever been to the dentist or broken a bone and they put that lead vest on you for the x-ray, it felt like this bulky heaviness. And he lifts it up, and I just see this like light emanating. And it just stops everything. Like I'm like, and my classmates are like, and we're all just like, looking at it. Because all you want to do is look at it. And it was warm, and it was moving, and it was peace. It was just peace. And we just stood there, like looking at it for a couple minutes. And then Jesus said to me, he said, Scott, this is who you really are. This is who I made you to be. And like in that moment, I realized what I was seeing is I was seeing the Imago Dei, this like weird word. It happens about 7 times in the scriptures. We don't fully know what it means, but it has to do with dignity. It has to do with the dignity that God has given human beings from its essence. And from what I understood, like at the beginning in the poem, it says that God makes this form out of the earth, out of the dirt, which is just the elements of the universe. But what animates that form is this breath, this ruach, this spirit. And what I was seeing was like, just like my chromosomes are in my kids, so is that spirit, that ruach in me. There's no way to not be children of God. Like, what are you talking about? And then I was looking at this light and I was like, how do I not lose sight of this? And in like the least douchey way, he just was like, just be with me. When you're with me, you'll always see it in yourself and you'll always see it in others. And I looked up and I could see light in all of my classmates. I could see the light in all of my teachers. I could see light in everybody in the whole world. And it overwhelmed me. And I was like, what? I was like, what do you want me to do with this? He just looked at me and he said, whenever you speak to people, call out the light. Speak to the light in them. And then that was it.
So you took this experience
Yeah.
and you turned it into your one-man play.
It's at the end, yeah. I framed the whole thing as like, how do you find where you belong? And my premise is like, the place we don't know how to belong the most is in religion. It's the place we actually don't feel like we belong. And I give a number of examples. The whole thing works on going like, God made you deserving punishment. And if you don't say some things, you will deservedly be punished. And I'm like, and I know that's not true because I'm a dad. And I show like footage of my kids being born. I'm like, I actually think that becoming a parent completely changes your theology. Because it's not just ideas anymore, it's an embodied metaphor. And you go, oh, you're not. I'm not saying they don't become little turds at times, for sure. But you're like, no, you're innately beloved. You don't have to earn anything from me. And it gives you an insight in your own incarnation. And I end the whole show going, I put this whole thing together to tell you that we're not troubled guests in this world. That we're not troubled guests in this world. And we think that our journey is to figure out how to belong, and it's not. It's to awaken to the fact that we've always belonged. I kind of walk through my own like deconstruction, and I ask a lot of questions, and I don't really give any answers. My answer was seeing my belovedness. That's the only answer I really got of like, why is there so much suffering in the world? Why is there so much pain? What do we do with hopelessness? What do we do with faith structures that fall apart and we go, this is really ridiculous. I can't even believe I believe this stuff, like. Then there's not a lot of answers to that except like life has humbled me to a spot where I was cracked or ripped open and I saw like that I'm beloved. And that's the answer. Yeah. That changes how you live in the world. That's what you've been asked to do, is speak to the light in people, call out the light in them.
In our conversation about Instagram and the pushback that you've been receiving. Some of the hurt and pain that you're experiencing from this audience is like you're trying to call out the light, and they're saying that mission, that intention is not valid.
Yeah. Because of my experiences with a very living God and a living word and a living tradition, which are all working together, some of the conclusions I've come to on gender, race, orientation differ from others. It kind of goes back to like, you can use the Bible to justify all kinds of atrocities, which has been done historically. So really the question is like, well, how is the Bible transforming you and what's happening to you? And people come and they go, your truthful journey isn't true. It's actually a lie. That's really hurtful, you know, especially since the process of sharing your secret life with God is a vulnerable process.
Yeah.
And probably some of the people are just, angry themselves and shouldn't listen to them. But yeah, just some people have, in messages have said some really mean and unkind things. And I have to remind them, I know you see a big number there, but that doesn't mean that's the layers of armor around my heart.
Right.
Like, I'm a sensitive person who is also finding my way in the world.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think the greatest change in your spirituality will be like, do you think you have to bring God to people, or do you think that God is already in people? How do you connect with God? Somehow metaphorically, you have an internal portal to connect to the Spirit, your spirit to that spirit, whatever it is. You have some kind of interior phone line to the divine. Did somebody bring that to you, or did you awaken to it? If you awaken to it, then inside everyone is a phone line to God. And what you can do is help them awaken to that. Not bring it to them, but awaken to it. If that is the truth, then everybody of a skin color, of a gender, of an orientation has an internal line to God. Are you the judge of that phone line, or are you pointing to the phone line? You see what I'm saying? I think the problem is people go, no, there's only one way to make a phone call, and I know the way, and your phone call needs to look like how I make my phone calls. Instead of going, I'm trusting that whoever's on the other line knows why they put that phone line in there. That fundamental change in me spiritually has changed how I do everything, where it's like, I'm here to point you to pick up the phone. I want you to pick up the phone that's in you. I think what you're doing is the problem is probably you're ignoring it for a number of good reasons. But let's try to pick it up, see what happens.
In the hyper-polarized moment we find ourselves in society right now, hearing Scott talk about calling out the light in others is such a wonderful reminder that we can find the image of God in everyone.
Yeah, I think that's what Jesus meant when he told us to love our enemies.
Totally.
It's like, see the best in people. See the image of God and everyone that you come into contact with, even if you don't agree with them.
Oh, and it's so hard.
I know. But I keep loving you anyway. Ouch. You're actually the nicest person I know. It's not hard to love you.
Thanks, Steven.
You're welcome.
Well, and I think that because Scott is a visual artist, he uses so many word pictures to describe his spiritual journey. Trying to hold that image of divine light in each person we see can be difficult, but it's also a beautiful thing to do.
Well, in order to tell Scott's second act, our time machine needs to be set to 2012.
All right.
Scott was 35, and the song Call Me Maybe was being danced to by Olympians on airplanes.
I totally remember that.
And Michael Phelps was like cleaning up the Summer Olympics. Do you remember that?
I just met you, and this is crazy. I think you need to
You
sing
sound
it.
just like her. Yeah, we were watching the Olympics and just trying to get by, when your kid is like 1 year old and you just pray for a good night of sleep.
Yes.
That was the stage that we were in. Let's hear what was going on with Scott.
Act 2, There You Are. When Scott was in his 30s, he found himself on staff with a church in Houston as an artist in residence. Things were good for a time, but in spite of steady work and a consistent paycheck, fatigue was beginning to set in.
We had 5 services a weekend. I made 5 paintings a weekend.
Whoa.
So I made hundreds of paintings while I was there. Even though I'm an emotional person, I think when most people have seen live painting, it's very like expressive and dancing and very abstract. And I'm just like a boring guy in his back then in his 30s that would just stand there and make a painting. My stuff's very like figurative and symbolic. Yeah. But I had 5 services, so Saturday night and then 4 on Sunday. It would be exhausting, like the 4th or 5th time, I could just feel like my muscles tensing up and. And even just going like, I can't believe I got to do this for like 30 more minutes. But I don't live paint too much anymore. I still do like 1 or 2 conferences a year. One of them I do in Pittsburgh. There's like 4,000 people at it. So I have 4,000 people watching me do it. And I've just learned to... Well, I have a couple of things where I go, first of all, you don't need to freak out because everybody in this room already thinks you're amazing. Like nobody in this room is like, I could do that better than that guy. Everybody's already like, what is that guy going to do? So you're already winning. And then, I get really focused and go, just trust the Spirit in that whole process.
And what led to you leaving Ecclesia?
What happened is, it was like 2 weeks after Easter, and we didn't have offices. We had this one big room with this long table, and we'd all kind of sit around it and work. And then we had little office spaces if you needed to go have a personal conversation. But we all kind of worked at this big table together, and I just remember being on my laptop, and then this inaudible sound of breaking glass happened. And I felt like everything that was holding me together just started falling apart. And I just started crying at my computer. And my coworker, Paul, was like, hey, are you okay? And I was like, I don't really know why I get up in the morning anymore. And I'm just really tired. I'm really tired. It was like my soul and my body knew we couldn't do this anymore. And they forgot. And they were like, we're not going to check in with Scott's ego. It just like they started a coup and they like blew up the bridge on the River Kwai without me knowing. And it just like all tumbled down. Like it just all like exploded. And I was like, what's happening? I didn't know we were unhappy. Yeah. So it was a very like subconscious thing. It just fell apart. And now from my study and learning about depression and that, my deeper self was trying to get my attention. It had come to the spot where it was like, you're not listening to anything else. So we're just going to blow this whole thing up. Or else you're going to like completely destroy yourself. I mean, I have lots of reflections now on it. One is I worked with a leader who could run at a different pace than I could. And I think all of us felt like we had to run at that pace, and I couldn't. So yeah, after that burnout, I really needed like therapy and help. And my wife and I are both from the Northwest. And I remember her saying, she was like, I miss home. We were pregnant with our second. And she's like, I think I want to go back to the Northwest. And I had a relationship with World Vision. And a friend of mine, his department, a place opened up. And so once I landed a job, I put in my 2 weeks and I left. I'd never worked in a corporate climate. It was a struggle, but it was good for me. For one, I had a job where I could leave and not think about it once I left. And 2, it had really good health care, and I could start going to a therapist, which is what I needed. A couple things I learned about myself. One is I had taken for granted how I generated creative ideas. So what you find in corporate America is people would be like, let's go into this conference room. And we'd sit down with our crappy coffee and be like, all right, what's a creative solution for this problem? And everybody just sit there like, I don't know. Let's try to think harder. And that's not how creativity happens.
Let's stare up at the fluorescent lights in the ceiling
and be inspired.
What I started doing is like we'd have these meetings, we'd come to know fruition. And then on my lunch break, there was like a La Fitness. It's a French fitness group called La Fitness. It's a joke, LA Fitness. And I would go, they had a pool there.
It stands for The Fitness.
It stands for The Fitness with a feminine take on it. I would go swim laps on my lunch break, and during swimming laps, I would figure out the problem. I would have some creative solutions. Or I would like go on a long walk in the grounds they had some actually nice walks around the grounds. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, I've never had to like see how I did this. Now because I was just on my own, but now I've been put into a structure, and I'm seeing actually how I generate creative ideas is like, there's this kind of gathering, you gather all the elements together, and then you get into your body and your body figures it out. Go on a long walk, or go on a run, or go swim some laps, or go do something else, and it naturally comes together.
You know what's funny about that is a lot of the time when we're songwriting and we hit a roadblock.
Yeah.
Normally somebody's like, I need a drink, or like, I've got to go use the restroom. And almost every time they come back and they're like, I thought of it. Right? Yeah. It's like you have to leave the dead environment to like wake up your subconscious somehow.
Yeah. I just finished a book that comes out this fall, and I got a book coming out next year. So in the writing process, I will often like get up and then I'll just go write some of it on a walk, and then I'll come back and like finish it on the computer. It's this dance with your body and your mind. So I learned that at World Vision, which I'm really grateful for. But yes, and the therapy was really helpful. And one more thing is that, and I think this is really important as a creative, is it doesn't mean that necessarily you have to pay all your bills by being creative, but what you're essentially doing is you're committing to a practice. So even though I was burned out, I just said, I have to keep this up or it'll go away. 3 nights a week from 9 to midnight, I would just grab some beers and go into my painting studio, and I just paint for 3 hours.
Wow.
For nothing except to like honor that was a dance I needed to do. The paintings I was doing on wood, I was doing these Sharpie drawings of cathedrals, not pencils. So you had to commit. And then I would paint the cathedral. So leaving some of the Sharpie lines, but I'd add paint. Then I would sand the whole thing. So destroy like a good half of it. And then I would redraw it and repaint it with some different colors. And then I would like sand it again. And not just like light, like scrubbing the whole thing out. But you would see pieces of it still. And then I would redraw the whole thing again and then repaint it. And it was really physically involved. Like I was like sweating. I was like, you know. And now it was probably cathartic. I was like rubbing out all my professional Christian angst, like just sanding it all, destroying it all, and then like rebuilding it to create something unexpected, I guess. I didn't want to like translate something. I just spent 3 years and hundreds of paintings translating. And I didn't want to like translate. I just wanted to like make something beautiful. And I did like this whole like Notre Dame from the side with like graffiti and stuff.
It sounds like that time painting in your garage was like a huge part of your therapy.
Yeah, maybe I like probably now looking at it, yeah, I think it was just time to talk to the demons, work it out.
You leave your home and you're working out your life in your garage, and you're simultaneously learning more about yourself through conversations with a professional therapist. What did that do for you?
It was my first time working with a therapist, so I learned to be more and more unabashedly honest. That it actually didn't help me if I held back and tried to be kind or reserved. That what I needed to do was like unearth the real feelings that I'd had of feeling like betrayed or feeling like I was two different kinds of people. You know, because when you're like a professional Christian person, you have to be this person up front and hide the like honest parts of you too. Unless you learn how to like integrate yourself and not be a divided person, you can easily become divided, which I had done. That's essentially what had happened. I'd become so divided that I based my worth on what I could produce and how I could perform and all of that. So I think it was like, yeah, I was learning to be really honest and trust the process of being honest is what I learned from that therapist. We were only in Tacoma for 9 months, and then I got offered a job in Portland, Oregon. I worked at a design agency, and I'd been used to being like on staff as like one of the lead people and part of all the cool conversations. And then I was at this design agency, and like I was the lowest person on the totem pole. Like my friends would have meetings in rooms, and I'd just be like making web icons like, I'm a nobody. But during that time, I had 2 computer screens, and I would like be doing my work, and I would watch like comedy specials, like Mike Birbiglia, Dave Chappelle, and I would be taking notes and like I would be like, what are they doing? Like, I know that's funny, but why is that funny? For like 3 months, I was just studying on myself. I was studying like, how do you write an hour-long thing, you know? And what makes it interesting and what's happening. And man, that time being a nobody at this design agency gave me time to like learn. I'm not trying to be like a stand-up comedian, but comedy is definitely like an asset in public speaking. That completely prepared me for trying to hold people's attention for 90 minutes. Yeah, with a show.
Yeah, that job was funding your research.
Yeah, it did. It did. But after 7 months, they had their own financial problems that I got laid off. So we had moved again. We were living in a new spot, and I didn't really know what to do. But I remember my last day was Friday. The Saturday I woke up, my depression was gone. I had this deep sense in my spirit that what I needed to do Monday morning was not look through the want ads and be like, I got to get a job. I had this deep sense I needed to be quiet and listen, and I needed to go through Donald Miller's storyline workbook because he had given me one, and I'd just sat in a drawer for 9 months. Have you ever been given a book or something and you don't think about it, and then at some point it just is like, now it's time to read me, you know? And so
I've been calling you.
I've been called. I've been waiting for you. And so I went through it. There's a spot where you're supposed to take, it's kind of like what you guys asked me to do, is like take your highs and lows of your life and spend time with that and go, what is the theme of my life? Like, what is my narrative or calling? And as I sat with it, what came up, like I had to say it out loud, like it was like words were coming up and I was trying to catch them. I just said, you create bridges for people's doubts, despairs, failings, and you create bridges to help them get to the other side for faith and healing and stuff like that. And then the second part of that was like, yes, but you create bridges with your own shipwrecked life. And I was like, that's interesting. And then I prayed, because I'm a visual person. I was like, well, can you give me a picture of that? And then I got this image. This one side is a desert, and there's this deep, deep canyon. You can't see the bottom, this deep crevice. And on the other side is like a forest. And in the middle of this canyon is this one ship that has been like shipwrecked, and it makes a bridge across this canyon. So it's like this old leftover at some point where there was water, this shipwreck, and it creates this bridge. And so for the next 4 days, I like made that painting. So that kind of gave me a mindset of like, all right, how do I turn my own wounds or heartbreak or experiences into a way in which that helps people with facilitates their own story that's happening to them, and helps create a bridge as a process of that. I mean, all art does that really well. You're giving words or music or images to people's experiences, going, this is what's happening to me, or this is what I've been going through. Thank you for perfectly depicting it and figuring it out for me. While I was doing that, I started having these visions for my first one-man show. I remember the first time, I think it was on like Thursday, I was doing dishes. And I just like saw this scene and I was washing a dish and I was like, oh, that's something. What is that? And I was like, oh, that's a scene of something. And my company gave me like a month severance. So in January, my wife's unemployed. I had no work. And I feel the thing I need to do is write a show. And that sounds ridiculous, but I feel like in my heart of hearts, like what I'm supposed to do is write a show. And I was like, God, I need some kind of sign that this is the right thing to do. I got a check in the mail from some of our wealthiest friends that covered a month. And I was like, that's a good sign. What also happened was the church I left in Houston called me and he was like, hey, what if you came back?
Whoa.
And that sounded like, I was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like that, what are you talking about? I've only been gone for like 2 years. And they had moved into another building. And he's like, things are different here. You're probably different. I think we could really use you again. I ended up going back to Houston and meeting with the elders and the pastors. And we like worked all that stuff out and had a lot of healing. And I saw the ways that I had hurt them too. So it looked like, I was like, oh my gosh, I think we're going to go back to Houston. And then a week and a half later, after I'd come back, I called the person in charge of staff and I was like, hey, I haven't heard anything from you. And he goes, oh yeah, we decided to withdraw our offer. At the time, I think I was like 37, the breadwinner from a family of 4. And I don't know how to describe that. I had no idea of what to do next. I did not know. I didn't have any plans. I didn't have any fun ideas. I didn't have any opportunities. There was nothing. And I was so devastated. I remember like crying myself to sleep that night. And, I just was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Internally, what was happening was that, look, I've dedicated my life to following God. And I've had many moments throughout my life where I was just like, what do you want me to do? Where should I go? And I've had a deep sense of God leading me in that. And in this moment, I was like, you've led me to nothing. You've led me to a dead end. I put my trust in you now, and it's not just me at stake. It's like my children. Like I don't have any sense that you're involved anymore. And that was like the deep fear was just like I trusted a myth. I trusted something I shouldn't have trusted. Kurt Thompson, in his book Soul of Shame, he says that doubt is an emotional response. Like, I don't know if I can trust this relationally anymore. That's what doubt is.
How long were you in that space?
A couple days. So some work did come in. A guy named Jefferson Bethke, he's like a YouTuber, author, invited me to do a creative project with him on a video. So I went to Home Depot to get all of my supplies to put this sign together for this video shoot. And I'm in Home Depot and I see this guy, Cameron. Cameron is now, it's funny in retrospect, he's got long hair and a beard. He's a carpenter and he was the leader of a home church. So very messianic in his
And he wore
presence.
a white robe with a blue sash.
Yes.
He wore blue overalls and a white shirt. So yeah, I ran into him in the like nuts and bolts aisle, and I was like, "Oh, hi, Cameron," and we talked for a bit. And he's like, "How's your week been?" And I was like, "Honestly, it's been really shitty." And he's like, "Why?" And I told him all the reasons why. And then he looked at me and he goes, "I think God wants to tell you something." And for me, I was like, inwardly, I'm like, cool. When people of faith are like, I have a message from God. You're like, pretty sure a lot of it could be your own projections. But yeah, let's
see
hear
about
it.
that.
We'll see about that. And he goes, God wants you to know that he sees where you're at and knows it's really painful. And God also wants you to know that you have been obedient to him in reconciling those broken relationships with that church, even though you're not going to go and work there.
Whoa.
Yeah. And that made me tear up. And I probably like cried for like 30 seconds. It was like, okay, thanks. And that was really comforting. And then I was like, well, what are you here for? And he goes, honestly, I'm not here for anything. I was just in the area in my car with my wife, and I sensed the Spirit to say, go in Home Depot and wait. So he's like, I've just been waiting here for 20 minutes. He's like, my wife's in the car on her phone. I've just been standing here. And he like walked out with me, and I said hi to his wife, and I drove home, and I remember in the car going, okay, because what I was really concerned about is like, how am I going to provide for my family? That's what I was, we were just getting by. Things weren't great. And then like Providence had a deeper conversation that it wanted to have with me, which is, I can provide for you, but let's talk about the deeper thing. So then my, and this is still my running theory, which is, if Jesus wants me somewhere else, I would be. So what's the only conversation I can have by being here? And when I thought about that, I was like, what's the only conversation I can have by being in this complete, like this spot where I have no plans, no options, nowhere to go? And as I got quiet with that, the conversation was, am I still called to be an artist? Like not as a person, but like as a vocation. Because when I started at 27, like committing to being an artist, I was just a single guy. And then I got married, and my wife was like my sugar mama for like 5 years, And now I was like the breadwinner of a family. And I was like, I don't know how to make that much money as an artist. I don't. But the answer was, yeah, I'm still called to be an artist.
When you came to that conclusion, what did it feel like?
It was like frightening because of how unknown it was, but it was also like a hug from a friend I hadn't seen in a long time, Like it was like, oh, there you are, Peter, from,
With this squishy face.
Yeah, there you are.
I quote that line all the time. I love that line. For you youngsters out there who have no idea what we were talking about with the "There you are, Peter" line, just Google those words and you'll see a delightful scene from the 1991 Steven Spielberg movie Hook. You know what's funny about Hook is I remember reading an article because Julia Roberts was in it.
That's right. She was Tinkerbell.
Yeah. And she said that performing in front of like a green screen was the most miserable experience of her life.
Wow.
She was like, I will never do that again. And it's just like common practice now.
Yeah.
Like all the superhero movies and stuff, like that is what acting is now.
Huh.
And like Tinkerbell in Hook was sort of paving the way for our future movie special effects.
Wow, that sounds important.
Yeah. Yep. Our little Hollywood history lesson is really coming in handy.
Excellent.
Log that away, listeners.
Okay. In all seriousness, I love hearing how Scott's story unfolded. Normally, it's during the seasons of pain when we do the most growing.
Well, we're closing in on Scott's first act, and it begins in 1995. And since we were already talking about Hook, I figured I would fill you in on what Robin Williams was doing.
Oh, good.
Yeah. More movie trivia. Okay, in 1995, Robin Williams had moved on from his role of Peter Pan to the genie in Aladdin.
Yes.
Mrs. Doubtfire, and whoever the kid was who was grown up in the movie Jumanji. Dude, that movie was scary.
Yes.
There was like a mosquito scene where they like punch their little Their little
Mosquito
mosquito beaks. Yeah.
They're
like,
totally not called beaks.
the-
Tube faces. Straw mouths.
oh my gosh. Knife noses. They like
Ugh.
punched them through like the windshield. It was like horrifying.
Ugh.
I know.
Left a mark.
Yeah, it really did. It's very possible that Scott didn't see some of those movies in the theater right away, and you will hear why in just a moment.
Act 1, The Cathedral. For most people, the year after high school graduation is a formative time. A unique opportunity led Scott to a foreign country where his vision expanded beyond anything he'd known to that point. This act includes a sacred space, an alien, and Captain Planet.
Coming at the end of high school, a family friend, she lived in Europe. She was the director of a European ministry called the Longside Ministries. She was the European director, so in charge of all the contacts there. She was visiting stateside. We were talking. She's like, what do you think about next year after high school? I was like, I don't know, maybe college. She's like, why don't you consider coming in and being my assistant? Somebody else, this other girl, Cindy's going to do it. You two could help me with all the admin. We travel around. We visit all our contacts. Take a year break. And that sounded awesome. So I did that. It was great. Studied French, went to school for a little bit, did a lot of mail runs, just like things like that. But yeah, we live by this cathedral. It's impressive. It's got one tower. It's made of red brick. It's beautiful. It's a really old cathedral in France, in Strasbourg. And I went there every day. From that time, now in retrospect, what really hit me was like this whole building was created during a time when nobody had a Bible. Only the priest did, and it was in Latin. It was before the printing press. So the whole building is made to talk about the scriptures without using words. So it's all carvings and stained glass, and the doorways are filled with sculptures. And what hit me was like, oh, this whole thing speaks to the story of God visually. I've felt like an alien in Protestantism my whole life. And so it was in this moment I was like, oh, there's a place for me. I just grew up in the wrong tradition. This makes sense. The architecture's doing something, and, you walk in, it draws your eyes up. It's making what's invisible visible. It's architecture and art does that. Essentially, that's what spirituality is. It's making what's invisible visible. It's giving a framework to help you get to the essence, some mechanics to help make shape of this ethereal, intangible thing sometimes. The way that I would say it now is that we used to make our sacred spaces as a teacher, and now we just make our sacred spaces for a teacher. And that's why I feel like our sacred spaces feel very lacking. Because we said the most important thing in this space is the person on the microphone, so everything should be about that. Whereas sacred spaces used to be the teacher themselves, and periodically a priest would get up and say some words, or they'd come together. And so, like, what's great about traveling, and what I think the cathedral did, is it took me out of this upside down Viking ship Lutheran church I grew up in Seattle, and said, no, there's this hundreds and hundreds of years of people imaging their experiences and building and crafting. But the space could always be teaching, whether anybody was there or not. That really formed me in thinking about coming back into, in essence, the Protestant tradition. I'm still a part of it, but going, why did we lose this formational tool? One of the best churches I've ever been a part of was this church that was entirely in French, and I mostly didn't understand what was happening, but I could see what was happening, and that had a deep effect on me. I think everybody should live cross-culturally at some point. I think it's really important to just go, I don't know how to talk, I don't know how to communicate, I don't know how to be here, and find that the kindness and graciousness of strangers and another community is there, and they'll bring you in. And often I think when we approach the scripture that says like, take in, be kind to the stranger, we're always saying, yeah, I'm the person with power. I have the power to take in strangers. But it's really important, or if not invaluable, to be the stranger at some point in your life and let somebody take you in and be hospitable. And that was my experience of being in France. Is I became the alien in the country, and I was shown so much grace and kindness and wonder that it deeply moved me.
Did something with the cathedral impress upon you the need to express your art within the context of church?
So Mary is her name. Mary, one of the things she did is that we would travel to like Berlin, Estonia, all over France. And she would preach at these churches. She'd be like, here's the sermon I'm going to do. And she would ask me to make a drawing based on it. So she'd kind of walk me through it. And then I'd do a drawing. And then this is back in the day when you had like overhead projectors and, you know, and she would make a copy of that and put it up while she would teach and be like, I had Scott make a drawing of this. That was kind of the first time I was ever like imaging a sermon or a theological idea. And then when I went to college, this college ministry I was a part of, I started doing like chalk drawings with this band called Late Tuesday at their shows. And then when I moved back after college, I moved to Seattle, and a friend I knew in college worked at a church, and this church started asking me to come and do like these chalk drawings during services. And then I started doing painting. This is around the time I was teaching high school, waiting tables, and I was doing paintings periodically at this church. And this is where this kind of experience happened to me where I was like, what am I supposed to do with my life, you know? And my conclusion was, I think I should spend my life doing what I'm best at. Because like being an accountant, I don't think I'm doing anybody any help. And at that time, I was like, I think the thing I'm best at is making art. And that was a really disappointing conclusion. Because one, I wasn't good at all. And then two, I just felt like I was going to be left out of important work. Like I had friends who are teachers and in government or nonprofit and in healthcare, you know, helping people. And I was like, what, I'm supposed to be in a room like with my emotions, making stuff about it, you know. Like it felt like it wasn't important. And the metaphor that came to me, I was sitting at like a coffee shop in Seattle, which is completely cliche. But I just remember, I was like, oh, you know who I feel like? I feel like that kid Mati from Captain Planet who got the heart ring, you know, because Captain Planet was this environmental propaganda cartoon where Gaia, the Earth spirit played by Whoopi Goldberg, gives out these magic rings to teenagers to fight polluters. And they have all these powers like fire, earth, wind, water, and then there's heart. And all these earth, wind, fire, and water is a great band, but also like they're strong and impressive powers. And heart, Mati, who's from South America, says he has the power to instill empathy and caring in you to care for the planet. So there's like good and evil, like fighting and duking it. And there's one guy there going, holding his ring out going, I just want you to feel, you know, like, I was like, that sounds like the person who's going to get their butt kicked. That's what that sounds like. But I was like, okay, if that's what you want to give me, I'll take it. But if ever there's a moment where I'm judged for this decision, it's your fault, not mine, because I wouldn't have chosen it. But I was like, show me what you want me to do with this. And you know, I will say this, that you can have all the guns and power and missiles and bombs in the world, but none of that really changes human hearts. And to learn to wield the heart ring is to learn the conversation of the heart. And I actually think that is a real defining point of the artist, is to learn the conversation of the heart. And then I had this moment. I went to a Damien Rice concert. It's when his album O came out, which is a great album. Mm-hmm. It was at the Moore Theater in Seattle. And the Frames were touring, which is Glenn Hansard's band. And during the show, I didn't know anything about drugs. I thought I was on a contact high, because during the whole show, I just saw like pictures happening like art being made on stage. It was really weird. The next day at school, I used to have lunch with the librarian, and I was telling her
amazing.
about it, and she's like, "We should tell that guy your idea." I was like, "What guy?" She's like, "The guy you went and saw." I was like, "You mean Damien Rice?" She's like, "Yeah, tell him about your idea about making artwork on stage with him." And I was like, "Well, he's a little famous. I don't know if that'll happen." She's like, "Well, you never know." Later that day, I got a call from my friend Joe. I was going to go to New York City in 2 weeks, and Joe was like, "Hey, I just bought us tickets to see Damien Rice in the Frame, so we're going." And I told the librarian, she's like, "Well, there's your sign." So I made an 8-page proposal with drawings, put it in a little notebook that you turned in high school essays in. And I went to the concert. After the concert, went backstage by the buses. Damien did not come out, but Glenn Hanser did, gave him the folder. One of my only regrets in my life is like Glenn was like, "Well, we're all going to this bar, so why don't you just come with us and you can give it to him yourself." And I didn't. Because my friends were teachers and it was already like 1 a.m. and they had to get up. So I was like, anyways, I found out later on Glenn gave it to Damien and everybody read it and Damien never called me. But what it did,
The end.
I know, but what it did is it made me put my ideas down and imagine them. And on that trip to New York, I met all these artists. And I remember on my flight home, I was just having a soul conversation. And I just felt the Spirit say, "Just tell me what you want to do and I'll bless it." Like, what do you want to do? And I said, "All right, I want to be a full-time artist. I want to work at a church as an artist. I want to fight evil," meaning I want to do something that's important, and I want to go on tour with a band and make paintings during shows. I got really specific. And within 2 years, all of that happened. I quit my job teaching. I pursued being an artist. That church I'd been painting at gave me a studio space. I eventually came on staff, making paintings and being a part of the church. I started working with World Vision, raising money for AIDS orphans through art sales and performance stuff. And then a friend of mine named Sean McDonald, I think when was this? Early 2000s, started getting some traction and he was going to go on his first tour. And he invited me to come and make paintings during his tour. And I got to go on a 6-week bus tour making paintings.
Amazing.
So it all kind of happened. That's kind of where it all came through.
If Mary had not taken you to Europe and you hadn't spent days and days experiencing the beauty of a cathedral right down the street from where you were, what kind of art do you think you would be making? Or do you think you'd be making art at all?
If you take time to listen, your life will tell you the life it's looking for. And eventually I would have bumped up against other women and men who called that out of me, who had lived and done those things, and I would have seen some artifact of their lives and gone, "That's possible? You can do that in the world?" So if it wasn't a cathedral, it would have been in art history class at college. It would have been in the art museums or in the art galleries that I used to walk around in Seattle. I would have bumped up against it eventually.
I really appreciate the way that Scott answered that question. He believes that art belongs in his life and that one way or another, he was going to end up pursuing it because it's always moved him.
Yeah, it's kind of incredible to think about how God plants these different gifts and talents within each of us. And then throughout the course of our lives, we get to slowly uncover how those gifts manifest themselves in our lives and how they affect the people around us.
Well, I was talking to our daughter Lucy this morning when we were on our way to school, and I was talking about why we have these conversations with people. And it's because it moves people. It makes them feel something. It reminds them that they're not alone. And that's exactly what Scott was saying about wielding the heart ring, right? Is that he has been given this gift to help people feel things. And I love the way that he is pursuing it. It's actually the most meaningful thing that you can do. Remind people what it means to be truly alive. Well, JJ, we've nearly reached the end of our show, but not before a segment we call Let's Rewind the Tape!
Scott directs people to think deeply about their lives and faith by sharing with his online audience,
Painting in person,
and through his one-man shows,
because of skills he developed while in the Pacific Northwest,
and while working for a church in Houston,
a position he dreamed up because he attended a Damien Rice concert,
and found inspiration in Europe while he was living next to a cathedral.
To find out more about Scott, visit scottericksonart.com.
This episode of Instrumental was produced by me, JJ Heller.
And me, Dave Heller,
Our theme music is my song, Big Love, Small Moments.
that I helped write.
To find out more about me, listen to more of my songs, or watch my music videos, please visit jjheller.com. That's 2 letter J's, HELLER.com.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Instrumental.
So be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.